I'll begin by swearing you in.
Hello everybody, Ross Madden here. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me. Today we are going over the joint testimony that Peter Strzok gave before the House Oversight Committee and the House Judiciary Committee. Right off the bat, we're going to start with Mr. Goodlatte's opening statements and then go into Mr. Gowdy's opening statements, which both of them gave fantastic statements that exposed Peter Strzok's bias, and I think they're very important for us to take a look at. So let's go ahead and flip this around and start the show.
I wish this hearing were not necessary. Many children grow up wanting to become FBI agents, to catch bad guys and protect the American people. I have little doubt that our witness today has done that very thing during his many years serving as an FBI special agent. A special agent's mission is a vitally important business to which we dedicate some of our best and brightest. However, this is precisely why our joint investigation is such and eventually adjudicated. Would anyone sitting here today believe that this was an acceptable state of affairs, particularly at an agency whose motto is fidelity, bravery, and integrity? I think not. To my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, please replace President Trump's name with your own name in a small sample of things Mr. Strzok has said. Envision how you would feel if you found out that the chief agent investigating you as a member of Congress was making these statements. F Trump. Trump is a disaster. Just went to a Southern Virginia Walmart. I could smell the Trump support. Or perhaps most alarmingly and revealingly, we'll stop it, referring directly to Mr. Trump's candidacy for president. In fact, for those who think we are wasting time in this committee, suppose all of this had been said about candidate Obama before he was elected, or even more topical about Hillary Clinton while she was running in the same election. Would we be where we are today? The only honest answer is an absolute affirmative yes. Of course we would be here because every single Democrat would be protesting bias and discrimination against their preferred candidates by an out-of-control FBI and DOJ. So please stop saying this doesn't matter and is only the product of conspiracy theory. Instead, the American people hope you will understand that this investigation goes to the very heart of our system of justice, one that is supposed to be fair and treat everyone equally under the law. Mr. Strzok and others inside the FBI and DOJ turned our system of justice on its head, and that's why we're here and why this matters. Yesterday, Chairman Gowdy and I received a letter from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle raising numerous objections about the nature of our investigation. These claims are largely spurious, and I have responded publicly to them before. However, these claims are also revealing. The final line of that letter states that our Democratic colleagues will, quote, undertake efforts to protect their rights, end quote. I implore my friends not to continue their efforts to undermine this investigation. And as for their rights, I submit that the rights that should concern us are the rights of the American people, namely to know the facts, to trust that their law enforcement agencies are operating fairly and justly, and to feel secure in the knowledge that no one is above the law.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In our justice system, we give law enforcement officers incredible powers. The power to investigate, to search, to seize, to stop, the power to allege and accuse, the power to eavesdrop and intercept private communications, the power to look through bank records, the power to look through phone records, the power to even check what books you checked out of the library. These are awesome powers that must be used responsibly because those powers affect reputations and freedom. These awesome powers are given a correspondingly high expectation that these powers will be used fairly, lawfully, professionally, and in a manner worthy of our respect. About 2 weeks ago, FBI agent Peter Strzok was interviewed for more than 10 hours. We learned that Agent Strzok has a most unusual and largely self-serving definition of bias. Agent Strzok, despite the plain language of his texts and emails, despite the Inspector General's report, and despite common sense, doesn't think he was biased. He thinks calling someone destabilizing for the country isn't bias. He thinks promising to protect the country from someone he hasn't even begun to investigate isn't bias. He thinks promising to stop someone he is supposed to be fairly investigating from ever becoming president isn't bias. He thinks talking about an insurance policy to keep someone from becoming president isn't bias. That's for one of the folks he was investigating. He has a different set of rules for others that he's investigating. Agent Strzok thinks saying someone he is allegedly investigating should be elected president 100 million to 0 before he ever interviews her. He doesn't think that's bias. Agent Strzok thinks pronouncing someone innocent before bothering to interview more than 30 different witnesses isn't bias. He thinks claiming you can smell the Trump supporters isn't bias, but he doesn't say a single solitary word about being able to smell the support of any other candidate. To him, that isn't bias. The moment Special Counsel Bob Mueller found out about Peter Strzok's texts and emails, he kicked him off of the investigation. But that was 1.5 years too late. The text and the emails may have been discovered in May of 2017, but the bias existed and was manifest 1.5 years before that, all the way back to late 2015 and early 2016. So it wasn't the discovery of texts that got him fired. It was the bias manifest in those texts that made him unfit to objectively and dispassionately investigate. So if the bias existed in late 2015 and early 2016, and it did, his unfitness to investigate existed then as well. Agent Strzok struggled to define bias for the better part of 10 hours. For the rest of us, bias is the prejudging of a person, a group, or a thing. It usually has a negative connotation, but it is a preconceived position or a prejudgment. It is the making up of your mind ahead of time based on anything other than the facts, and that is exactly what he did. Bias is saying Hillary Clinton should win the presidency 100 million to 0 when she was still under investigation, wasn't even the nominee, hadn't been interviewed, and 30 other witnesses had also not been interviewed. In March of 2016, Agent Strzok had Clinton winning 100 million to 0, even though the investigation was far from being over. That is the prejudging of someone's innocence before all the evidence is in. On the other hand, he said Trump would be destabilizing, called him an idiot, abysmal, bigoted nonsense, called him a disaster, said he should F himself. Strzok promised to stop Trump from becoming president before the investigation even began. He talked longingly of Trump resigning 2 months after he was inaugurated and well before the special counsel investigation even began. Strzok even talked about impeachment the day special counsel was appointed. That is prejudging guilt, it is prejudging punishment, and it is textbook bias. We live in a 50-50 country, and we accept that. But we're a 100% country when it comes to having law enforcement that doesn't prejudge innocence before investigations are over and doesn't prejudge guilt and punishment before an investigation even begins. Agent Strzok had Hillary Clinton winning the White House before he finished investigating her. Agent Strzok had Donald Trump impeached before he even started investigating him. That is bias. Agent Strzok may not see it, but the rest of the country does, and it's not what we want, expect, or deserve from any law enforcement officer, much less the FBI. A fair, bias-free investigation is not a Republican or Democrat issue. It's an American issue, or at least it used to be.
Chair thanks the gentleman and recognizes the ranking member of the
Wow. Trey Gowdy just basically laid it out. He said that Strzok and the FBI pronounced Hillary's innocence before there was even an investigation, before 30 witnesses were interviewed. That is bias. Prejudging before the investigation, that is bias. And the same thing with Trump. He prejudged guilt before the investigation had even begun. That is bias. And Trey Gowdy just lets everyone know that we all know it. We're going to see Democrats absolutely do everything they can to obstruct the questioning of Peter Strzok. So we're going to go ahead and skip ahead to questions for Peter Strzok given by Trey Gowdy and Goodlatte.
Do you swear that the testimony that you are about to give, Mr. Peter Strzok is a Deputy Assistant Director of the Human Resources Division of the FBI. Mr. Strzok has worked at the FBI for approximately 22 years. Prior to his current assignment, he was a Deputy Assistant Director in the Counterintelligence Division. It was his assignment in that division that brings him before the committees today as we continue our investigation. Your written statement will be entered into the record in its entirety, and we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. To help you stay within that time, there's a timing light on your table. When the light switches from green to yellow, you have 1 minute to conclude your testimony. When the light turns red, it signals your 5 minutes have expired. Mr. Strzok, you may begin.
Chairman Goodlatte and Gowdy, Ranking Members Nadler and Cummings, thank you for the opportunity to testify before your committees again, this time in an open hearing. I testify today with significant regret, recognizing that my texts have created confusion and caused pain for people I love. Certain private messages of mine have provided ammunition for misguided attacks against the FBI, an institution that I love deeply and have served proudly for over 20 years. I'm eager to answer your questions, but let me first address those much discussed texts. Like many people, I had and expressed personal political opinions during an extraordinary presidential election. Many contained expressions of concern for the security of our country, opinions that were not always expressed in terms I'm proud of. But having worked in national security for 2 decades and proudly served in the U.S. Army, those opinions were expressed out of deep patriotism and an unyielding belief in our great American democracy. At times, my criticism was blunt, but despite how it's been characterized, it was not limited to one person or to one party. I criticized various countries and politicians, including Secretary Clinton, Senator Sanders, then candidate Trump, and others. But let me be clear, unequivocally and under oath, not once in my 26 years of defending our nation did my personal opinions impact any official action I took. This is true for the Clinton email investigation, for the investigation into Russian interference, and for every other investigation I've worked on. It is not who I am, and it is not something I would ever do, period. I understand that my sworn testimony will not be enough for some people. After all, Americans are skeptical of anything coming out of Washington. But the fact is, after months of investigations, there's simply no evidence of bias in my professional actions. There is, however, one extraordinarily important piece of evidence supporting my integrity, the integrity of the FBI, and our lack of bias. In the summer of 2016, I was one of a handful of people who knew the details of Russian election interference and its possible connections with members of the Trump campaign. This information had the potential to derail and quite possibly defeat Mr. Trump, but the thought of expressing that or exposing that information never crossed my mind. That's what FBI agents do every single day, and that's why I'm so proud of the Bureau. And I'm particularly proud of the work that I and many others did on the Clinton email investigation. Our charge was to investigate it competently, honestly, and independently, and that's exactly what happened. I'm also proud of our work on the Russian interference investigation. This is an investigation into a...
We're going to take a quick pause there. So Peter Strzok is basically saying that he knows that he can investigate Hillary Clinton without bias, but he's going to talk to people within who's also involved in the investigation many times a day, potentially hundreds of times a day, about his bias during FBI hours, during the days, during the times when he should be investigating. He's going to express his bias, but his bias isn't going to interject into the investigation that he is currently undergoing. It makes no sense. While he's biased while he's texting, and then now when he's on the computer he's not biased, and then he's texting again, he's biased, and then he's on the computer, he's not biased, because he's done things that are he released Hillary Clinton from the gross negligence quotation. That was coming from his computer. That was tracked to his IP address. And so when he says, my computer wasn't biased, but my text messages were, and that was his FBI cell phone. It's not like that wasn't an FBI document. So his FBI documentation expresses bias. He was expressing that bias with other members of the investigation. So the entire investigation is now biased. Not just Peter Strzok, but Lisa Page and anyone else involved. They were at least pulling obstructionist tactics, trying to get the investigation to go the way that it did, which was to exonerate Hillary Clinton before she was even really investigated, and to try to get this investigation into Trump, which it successfully has been ongoing for 2 years and has been completely destructive to not just President Trump, but our entire country. Let's continue with Peter Strzok's BS opening statement. Now he's going to address why his Trump investigation wasn't biased, but we all know, and the OIG admitted that, yes, Peter Strzok was biased when he was making these decisions. The OIG would not admit that he was biased when he was making Hillary Clinton's decisions to exonerate her, but we all know what was going on. Peter Strzok was in the bag for the Democrats, and so was the entire FBI and Department of Justice. That's why the Department of Justice leader was meeting with Hillary Clinton's husband on a tarmac in a private jet to exonerate her. Let's continue.
Direct attack by a foreign adversary. And it is no less so simply because it was launched against our democratic process rather than against a military base. This is something that all Americans of all political persuasions should be alarmed by. In the summer of 2016, we had an urgent need to protect the integrity of an American presidential election from a hostile foreign power determined to weaken and divide the United States of America. This investigation is not politically motivated. It is not a witch hunt. It is not a hoax. I expect that during this hearing, I'll be asked about that ongoing investigation. Where the FBI has directed me not to answer, I will abide by the FBI's instructions. But let me be clear. This is not because I don't want to answer your questions. If I were permitted to answer, I would. And the answers would doubtless be disappointing to the questioners and undermine the conspiracy narrative being told about the Russia investigation. I understand we're living in a political era in which insults and insinuation often drown out honesty and integrity. But the honest truth is that Russian interference in our elections constitutes a grave attack on our democracy. Most disturbingly, it has been wildly successful, sowing discord in our nation and shaking faith in our institutions. I have the utmost respect for Congress's oversight role, but I strongly believe today's hearing is just another victory notch in Putin's belt and another milestone in our enemy's campaign to tear America apart. As someone who loves this country and cherishes its ideals, it is profoundly painful to watch and even worse to play a part in. Mr. Chairman, I welcome your questions.
We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions. I'll begin by recognizing the Chairman of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, Mr. Gowdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Agent Strzok, the FBI investigation into potential Russia collusion with the Trump campaign began on July 31st, 2016. You drafted the originating document. You approved the originating document. You were the point of contact on the originating document, and the FBI has represented to Congress that nothing from an investigative standpoint with respect to Russian collusion and the Trump campaign began before July 31st, 2016. But 10 days before the investigation even began, 10 days before you drafted the originating document, approved the originating document, was the point of contact on the originating document, 10 days before the investigation began, which the department you work for says nothing was done before July 31st. You said Trump is a disaster. I have no idea how destabilizing his presidency would be. And because you struggled a couple of weeks ago with a word that I thought had a commonly accepted definition, I'm going to go ahead and give you the definition of destabilizing. The first one kind of is obvious. It's to make unstable. The second one caught my attention, the second dictionary definition. To cause something such as a government to be incapable of functioning or surviving. That's a pretty significant allegation to make 10 days before you even began to investigate someone. So that was before July 31st. I want to ask you in that first week, we'll go ahead and up it to 8 days, between July 31st and August 8th, how many interviews did you conduct related to the alleged collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign?
So, Congressman, as you know, counsel for the FBI, based on the special counsel's equities, has instructed me not to answer questions about the ongoing investigation.
I'm asking for a
into
number.
Russian attempts to interfere.
Agent Strzok, I'm asking for a number. I haven't gotten to the names. How many people had you interviewed between the beginning of it on July 31st and August the 8th? It's an 8-day time period. We're a week into an investigation. How many people had you interviewed?
Congressman, I understand your question. I appreciate it, and I would very much like to answer. But as I've stated, as you know, that counsel of the FBI, based on the special counsel's equities, have directed me not to answer any questions about the ongoing investigation into Russian attempts to interfere.
So you
Well, the gentleman will suspend and the clock will suspend. Mr. Strzok, you are under subpoena and are required to answer the question. Are you objecting to the question? If so, please state your objection.
Mr. Chairman, I object.
The gentleman.
We're about to hear the Democrats try to obstruct and block the questioning because we're coming down to the point where Peter Strzok no longer wants to answer questions. Well, guess what? He's under subpoena. He is going to argue that he is not under subpoena, that he is voluntarily appearing before these committees, but he is also under subpoena. So I'm not sure why his voluntary actions matter not at all. In this case, he is under subpoena. So once you're under subpoena, now that you're doing it, it doesn't matter that it's voluntary. You've been required to do it. So obstructionist Democrats are going to get in the way of this questioning, and it's going to make this content a little worse, but I think it's worth watching just to see a little bit of how this goes down. Mr. Nadler is actually the main obstructionist, and Mr. Swalwell gets in there and helps out. Let's take a look.
Gentleman, it does not have standing to
Mr. Chair-
object. There is no
Point of order.
No point of order here. The
Point of order, it should be heard.
gentleman will state his point of order.
My point of order is that intentionally or otherwise, this demand puts Mr. Strzok in an impossible position. He is still an employee of the FBI, and FBI counsel has instructed him not to answer the question.
gentleman's-
If we have a problem with this policy, we should take it up with the FBI, not badger Mr. Strzok.
The gentleman's point of order is not well taken.
It's right on point.
No, it's not.
Can the entire FBI be subpoenaed or just members from the FBI be subpoenaed? It's a confusing, that's a confusing question. He's being subpoenaed and that matters. He needs to answer the questions that are asked of him. as an FBI agent, and you shouldn't be able to just say that the FBI, well, the FBI says this, so I don't have to answer. The FBI says I shouldn't answer, so I don't have to answer. We're subpoenaing you. You're an FBI agent. It's as if the FBI is under subpoena. I don't think the entire, you don't have to subpoena the entire department in order to get answers from somebody within the department. Let's keep going.
Mr. Strzok, are you objecting to the question? And if so, please state your objection.
Mr. Chairman, two things. One, I do not believe I am here under subpoena. I believe I am here voluntarily. Second, I will not, based on direction of the FBI to me, based on that, I will not answer that question.
Because he believes that he is there voluntarily and not under subpoena, he believes he has the legal right to deny questions that are, I mean, he's in a subpoenaed testimony right here, and he's denying questions. That is illegal, and he's only able to do that because of his belief that he is there voluntarily. He is not.
Because it goes to matters which are related to the ongoing investigations being undertaken by the Special
Mr.
Counsel's
Strzok,
Office.
you have not stated a valid legal basis for not responding to a question directed to you by a member of the United States House of Representatives, and you are overruled.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Let me continue. Your testimony is essential to this hearing and to our oversight and information gathering functions with regard to the actions taken and decisions made by the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of
That agent that just whispered in Mr. Nadler's ear, I'm pretty sure we should take another look at who that person was. This person right behind Mr. Goodlatte, let me just make sure my volume's still up good. Yeah, what is he saying to Mr. Nadler is very important. This person is an agent and has just basically told him, obstruct at all costs, because this is getting bad. This is getting really bad for Peter Strzok.
with regard to the actions taken and decisions made by the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation in 2016 and 2017, I am specifically directing you to answer the question in response to our subpoena, notwithstanding your objection.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Strzok, please be advised that you can either comply with the committee's directive to answer the question or refuse to do so, the latter of which will place you at risk of a contempt citation and potential criminal liability.
Point of
Do
order.
you understand that?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
The question is directed to the witness.
And I have a point of order before he answers the question.
The point of order is not well taken until...
You don't know what the point of order is. You can't say it's not well
the
taken.
point of order, the witness will answer the question.
Mr. Chairman, I raise my point of order and I insist on it.
What is the point of order?
The United States Attorney's Manual instructs department personnel not to respond to questions about the existence of an ongoing investigation or comment on its nature or progress. In a letter to Congressman John Linder in 2000, referred to as the Linder letter, the department made this policy explicitly applicable to requests from Congress. Quote, although Congress has a clearly legitimate interest in determining how the department enforces statutes, congressional inquiries during the pendency of a matter pose an inherent threat to the integrity of the department's law enforcement and litigation functions, unquote. Therefore, the question being directed at the witness is out of order. The witness's declination to answer it as against the instructions of the FBI, pursuant to FBI.
We're going to go ahead and skip ahead to when the obstruction slows down, because it gets ridiculous and they just go on for minute after minute after minute, and then they say, oh, Trey Gowdy's time's up. It's been over for 2.5 minutes. Well, no, this is a Democrat strategy. Once Trey Gowdy's time has begun, they start obstructing, and then they try to just run it out so that he can't make these incredible questions and that expose the FBI as a corrupt institution.
A contempt citation.
A point of order.
Continue with the hearing, but based on your refusal to answer the question at the conclusion of the day, we will be recessing the hearing, and you will be subject to recall to allow the committee to consider proceeding with a contempt citation.
Agent Strzok, Just so the record's clear, because it's been a little while, I didn't ask you the content of those interviews. I didn't ask you the names of who you interviewed. I asked you whether or not you interviewed anyone from July the 31st until August the 8th. And I find it interesting that the FBI will tell us no interviews were conducted before July 31st. That apparently doesn't impact an ongoing probe. But between July 31st and August 8th, it does. Here's the good news. I already know the answer to it. I went and looked at the file. The first interview that I can find is on August the 11th of 2016, which is 11 days after it began, which makes me wonder, on August the 6th, so you hadn't interviewed anyone, you're investigating this alleged Russian collusion with the Trump campaign. You're the lead investigator. You originated the investigation. You're the point of contact. You drafted the document. And here you are before you've interviewed a single solitary witness saying F Trump. Then that same day, your colleague, Lisa Page, wrote, "Maybe you're meant to protect the country from that menace." And you responded, "I can protect the country at many levels." We're not even a week into an investigation that you originated, approved, were the contact for. You hadn't interviewed a single solitary soul until August 11th, and you're already promising to protect the country from that menace, Donald Trump. And then on August the 8th, you still hadn't interviewed anyone. You're 8 days into your Russian collusion with the Trump campaign investigation, and you got another text from your colleague, Lisa Page. "Trump's not ever going to become president, right? Right?" And you replied, "No, he's not. We'll stop it." By the time you promised to stop him from becoming president on August the 8th, how many interviews had you conducted?
Mr. Gowdy, so two answers to that. One, with regard to how many interviews had or had not been conducted, I've been directed by counsel for the FBI not to answer that question. Second, sir, I think it's important to take those texts in the
Violating his subpoena.
context of how they were written and what they meant.
And someone may ask you that question, Agent Strzok, but I didn't. I asked you how many people you interviewed before you wrote it. If you want to get into context, let one of my other colleagues do that with you. Here's what I want to know. Who's the he and he's not?
He is then candidate Trump.
So when you said, no, Donald Trump's not, in connection with the question, going to become president, what's the it?
Chairman
We'll
Gowdy,
stop it.
Chairman Gowdy, that text needs to be taken in the context of
I'm
which it was
asking, look, if you want to have a debate over a two-letter word, we're going to have to do that some other time. What and who did you mean by it?
Mr. Gowdy, as I've stated, that text was written late at night in shorthand.
I don't
not
care
intended to
when
be
it was
parsed
written.
about.
I don't care
What's
whether it was
important to
longhand,
understand is
cursive. I don't care about any of that. I want to know what it meant, Agent Strzok.
It would be his candidacy for the presidency,
wasn't that
and
tough?
my sense that the American
it's not that tough.
population would not vote him into office.
Right. Well, we hadn't gotten to the will yet.
Well, I'm
Your
trying to cut to the
testimony
chase and
is
explain the text.
The
I
will
wrote
is
it.
the American people. Is that right? That's your testimony. The will stop it. You were speaking on behalf of the American people. Is that correct?
Mr. Gowdy, what my testimony is and what I said during extensive asking of this question during my prior interview is I don't recall writing that text. What
Are
I
you
can
denying
tell you-
writing the text?
What I can tell you is that text in no way suggested that I or the FBI would take any action to influence the candidacy of
Agent
candidate
Strzok,
Trump.
that
By
is a
sub-
fantastic answer to a question nobody asked.
Yeah, Mr.
My
Gowdy, you asked what I
question to
meant.
you is
Chairman,
the
is the witness
will.
going to be permitted to answer the
You
question
said-
posed?
After the conclusion of Mr. Gowdy's questions, if there is a question that he has not had the opportunity to answer, he will be given additional time to do that. The witness will.
We look forward to that.
Mr. Gowdy's now, and he will not be interrupted by others.
So your testimony.
His time
a
has
couple of
expired,
weeks
Mr.
ago-
Chairman.
Your
By
testimony
2.5
a couple of
minutes.
weeks- It's going to be tough for me to get through it if I keep getting interrupted. Your testimony a couple of weeks ago was the we meant the American people, which I found confusing because on November the 7th, which is the day before the election, You said this.
He just said that the we'll stop it. The we is the American people and not the FBI. That is an unacceptable answer that we all know is bogus. The American people elected Donald Trump. We didn't stop it. We made it happen. And he tried to stop it. Peter Strzok and the FBI agents within this investigation team. And you failed to stop it, guys, because you're 23 people against 65 million people. You guys got outnumbered, outvoted, and now you're trying to obstruct justice. We're coming for you. Keep it going, Trey.
You were concerned that those same American people that you were speaking on behalf of might actually elect Donald Trump president. So you said, OMG, this is effing terrifying. I think we know what effing means. I'm pretty sure we have OMG down too. What was terrifying about those same American people you trusted to stop him in August, not stopping him in November? What was so terrifying about that, Agent Strzok?
Mr. Gowdy, I do not have a copy of the transcript. We have not been provided that transcript.
It's your text. It's not the transcript, it's your text.
Mr. Gowdy, what I would say in that is, one, I was not referring to the American electorate at all. The American electorate I respect in their decisions, and their right to vote is absolutely a cornerstone of our democracy. So at no time did I insult or call into question the judgment or the power of the American electorate. What I was expressing in that text is my personal belief and my personal sense of how I saw and what I believed in the potential upcoming administration.
And see, that's what I find so confounding, because in August you blamed the we on the American people, that the American people would stop it, because you don't want it to be you and Lisa
Mr.
Page,
Chairman,
and you don't want it to be the FBI.
Are we not given 5 minutes to answer questions? We have indulged this harassment 9 minutes.
The
This
chair,
Judiciary and the Oversight Committee, I thought we
the
operated
gentlewoman,
under
the
rule of
gentlewoman will
law.
suspend. The chair, in agreement with the ranking members of both committees, agreed that there would be liberality in the questioning by the chairman and the ranking members of each committee. The gentleman will continue.
What I find
Then,
confounding,
Mr. Chairman,
Agent
we
Strzok,
expect that liberality on every one of our questionings.
what I find confounding, Agent Strzok, is you were counting on the American people. That was the we you referenced in August when you said, we'll stop it. But the American people didn't stop it. He actually won. So then we go to March of 2017, and you're already talking longingly about him resigning. And then we go to the day that Special Counsel Mueller, well, before we go to that, that's March of 2017. March of 2016, you wrote, God, Hillary should win 100 million to 0. And I'm assuming Hillary would be former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton?
That's correct.
All right. In March of 2016, weren't you investigating her for potential mishandling of classified information?
We were.
Had you interviewed her yet?
No.
Had you interviewed more than 30 other witnesses that wound up being interviewed?
I would have to check the case file, but I'll take your representation.
Well, if she had said something incriminating in your interview that took place months later of her, would she have won 100 million to 0 then?
Likely not, no.
Well, then why wouldn't you wait until the investigation was over before you have her the nominee and winning a general election against an opponent that hadn't even been named yet? 100 million to 0, Agent Strzok? That's how bad she should win?
Mr. Gowdy, those personal expressions of my observing the political process of the presidential primaries had no bearing on my actions of any investigation, to include the investigation of Secretary Clinton.
You couldn't think of
or anybody else. Sir,
you couldn't
if I
think
may,
of a single person that would not vote for Hillary Clinton for president? 100 million to 0,
Sir,
Agent Strzok?
Sir, that was clearly hyperbole, which I...
Well, let's
the
say it
text-
was hyperbole. Let's divide it by 10. How about we say it was hyperbolic and divide it by 10? 100 million divided by 10, I'm pretty sure is 10 million. 0 divided by 10 is still 0. You couldn't think of a single solitary person that was going to vote for her for president before you interviewed her and while you were supposed to be investigating her.
Congressman, clearly that's not the truth. Clearly, I could envision millions of Americans who are likely and did vote for then candidate.
Well, you wrote it.
My point, sir.
Did you
my
write
point-
it? Did you write that
I
text?
did write that, sir.
Okay.
in a
Were you under
expression of
duress?
Political expression engaging in hyperbole.
Were you under duress?
Asked and answered over and over again.
The gentlewoman will suspend. The gentleman from South Carolina controls the time.
All right, we're going to go into one other time period. May 17th, 2017, Bob Mueller is appointed. Your friend Jim Comey's been fired. He's already leaked the memos to his law professor friend, and Mueller is special counsel. Do you remember how long it took for you to start talking about impeachment after Bob Mueller was appointed?
I don't, sir.
1 day. 1 day. And you were talking about impeachment. And for anyone who may have missed it the day after his appointment, Agent Strzok, you did it again 5 days later. Now, how many interviews had you done as part of the special counsel team within the first 5 days of his appointment?
Sir, again, same answer as before. I can't get into details.
Right, and the answer is also the same. It's 0. No interviews had been done.
I don't know if that's true or not.
No interviews had been done by August the 8th when you're talking about stopping him and how terrifying it would be for him to win and how you can protect the country. And no interviews had been done before you're talking about impeachment of the president. But no
Mr.
wonder
Chairman.
Bob Mueller kicked you off of the investigation, Agent Strzok. My question is, if you were kicked off when he read the text, shouldn't you have been kicked off when you wrote them?
Not at all.
Well, it wasn't the discovery of your text, Mr. Strzok. It was the existence of your bias that got you kicked off.
No, Mr. Gowdy, it wasn't. I do not have bias. My personal opinions in no way.
Well, then
have
why did
ever
you get kicked
impacted
off?
your
Why'd you get kicked off?
Mr. Gowdy, my understanding of why I was kicked off was that based on understanding of those texts and the perception that they might create is
Well,
something
hang
that
on a
Special
second,
Counsel
Agent
Mueller,
Strzok. Hang
who's a
on a
man of
second.
extraordinary
Perception.
integrity.
You're saying it was the perception. There are 13 Democrats on the special counsel probe, including one who went to what he hoped was a victory party. That's a perception problem, too. They weren't kicked off. You were. Why were you kicked off?
Mr. Gowdy, I cannot speak to Special Counsel Mueller's
How long did
staffing
you talk to
decisions
him?
or
Please
the
let him
reasons why he did or didn't.
How long did you talk to him when he let you go?
Witness this answer the
Witness
question.
will be afforded the opportunity.
My recollection, it was a short meeting, somewhere between 15 to 30 minutes, probably around 15 minutes.
And your testimony is Bob Mueller did not kick you off because of the content of your text. He kicked you off because of some appearance that he was worried about.
My testimony, what you asked and what I responded to, was that he kicked me off because of my bias. I'm stating to you it is not my understanding that he kicked me off because of any bias, that it was done based on the appearance. If you want to represent
I'm confused on what the difference between bias and the appearance of bias is. If everyone thinks you're biased, but we can't read your mind and prove that you inside your head are biased, aren't you still biased? We all know you're biased, dude. We all know it. We can't read your brain, and so what? These laws that require brain reading, this Hillary Clinton getting off because she didn't intend to release 30,000 emails of, classified information onto the dark web where anyone could get to it. This is just, these mind-reading laws are ridiculous, and they protect agents, and it's not okay. We know you were biased. We know there was intent, and this is just, if we can show that you did it, it does not really matter what your brain says you were thinking, or what you say your brain was thinking.
what you said.
Also, Peter Strzok is starting to look very angry. Look at his body language right here. His head is really down. He's starting to get into his bullheadedness, and you can see veins popping out on either side of his eyes. Right up here, you can see the veins start to bulge as his stress levels rise.
That accurately, I'm happy to answer that question, but I don't appreciate what was originally said being changed.
I don't give a damn what you appreciate, Agent Strzok. I don't appreciate having an FBI agent with an unprecedented level of animus working on 2 major investigations during 2016.
The chair recognizes.
Oh my goodness. That was incredible. Let's listen to that again.
I don't
Appreciate what was originally said being changed.
I don't give a damn what you appreciate, Agent Strzok. I don't appreciate having an FBI agent with an unprecedented level of animus working on 2 major investigations during 2016.
Whoa. Whoa, and he set it up really well. He doesn't give a damn what you appreciate. I don't appreciate having biased agents. Let's listen to it one more time.
Level of animus working on two major investigations, having an FBI agent with an unprecedented level of animus working on two major investigations during 2016.
I don't appreciate having an FBI agent with an unprecedented level of animus working on the two biggest investigations. Oh my gosh, that's just an incredible statement. That should be tweeted out and retweeted by everyone in America.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland.
We're not going to even give Peter Strzok the ability to answer. And we're going to skip ahead to Congressman Isa, who did a very good job of bringing some pointed questions towards Peter Strzok.
On the disposition of the case months ahead of interviewing multiple witnesses.
I remember quite a few cases where I or agents would discuss the prospects of the outcome of the case with prosecutors as the case was going on, from the beginning of the case, talking about what crimes may or may not be relevant, as the case proceeded to identify which elements may or may not be strong or demonstrable, as well as towards the end when we were trying to shore up evidence that may or may not be there. But
And let me ask you this about that. In regard to those cases, was it normal behavior on your part to chat with colleagues in the manner you did on the Russia case about how much you despise the very person you're investigating, or complimenting the person you're investigating in the Clinton case? Is that typical?
Sir, I would draw a distinction between commenting on case-related matters versus discussion of personal belief. I think those are very different matters than saying this person as a witness was not credible, or this person as a target or a subject did or didn't do something. That is a very different
So you could
matter in my
completely
mind.
separate out what your personal opinion is from what you discussed with others in investigations.
I am telling you, sir, I separated out my personal belief from any
But you did not
action
do
I
that with
took.
regard to Attorney Page, who was also involved in these investigations.
Sir, I
correct?
disagree with that. I separated out my personal beliefs from any action I took officially as an FBI agent every day.
Standard to the previously unreleased testimony of Andrew McCabe.
This is a bombshell part of this testimony. So the Democrats' motion to get the Peter Strzok testimony that was given behind closed doors released, at least the transcripts of it, released to the public, because that would allow Page, Lisa Page, who's being interviewed tomorrow, to see the questions that he was asked, giving her an advantage in this testimony. Well, Congressman Meadows says, well, maybe we should entertain that. I think that that's reasonable for the Democrats in the light of transparency. But then this bombshell happens, because that is actually a huge mistake. Because when you apply that to all of the testimonies that have been put behind closed doors, you're talking about more than just Peter Strzok. You're talking about Andrew McCabe. You may be talking about many other closed-door testimonies, which I would love to see the transcripts of. I think that will release a lot, and that's proven testimonial documents. So that's going to really, this is going to open this investigation up in a big way.
I would also hope that we would have give the FBI the opportunity for redaction of anything that would impact on the nation's national security. I think that is extremely important, and I hope the gentleman would accept my modification.
Reclaiming my time, it's my understanding the gentleman does accept that, from the gentleman from North Carolina. And I want to thank him for trying to, as he usually does, trying to work these things out, and full transparency. And I think that's important. I think the American people and this committee would appreciate it.
Will the
again,
gentleman yield
thank you.
for a question?
I yield.
Does the gentleman from North Carolina's suggestion relate solely to the testimony of Agent Strzok, or under the same guise of transparency, would we apply that same process and that same standard to the previously unreleased testimony of Andrew McCabe, who was examined in a similar environment?
I yield to the gentleman.
I think in a spirit of transparency, we need to look at all transcribed interviews to let the American people judge for themselves. I thank the gentleman for his question, and I think that's consistent.
Congressman Matt Gaetz and Mark Meadows with the 1-2 punch. Let's get Andrew McCabe's testimony out into the public. I love it.
With my conversation with the gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you very much. And I yield back.
The chair recognizes
didn't mean to do that. That was a mistake.
the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield my time to my friend and colleague from Texas, Mr. Ratcliffe.
I thank my colleague for yielding. Agent Strzok, on May the 9th, 2017, President Trump fired FBI Director Jim Comey. That same day, you and FBI lawyer Lisa Page exchanged quite a few texts on the topic.
I'm sorry, I said Isa earlier. This is Ratcliffe, apparently.
At 8:14 p.m. on that day, you texted Ms. Page and said, quote, "And we need to open the case we've been waiting on now while Andy is acting," end quote. First, is that Andy McCabe, the former Deputy Director of the FBI, who has since been fired and criminally referred by the Inspector General?
It is.
All right. And what case are you referring to opening now that Andy is the acting director of the FBI?
Sir, to get into that would relate to ongoing investigations, which, consistent with the department's policy on ongoing investigations and based on the special counsel equities, I'm not authorized to discuss ongoing investigations.
Okay, well, let me see if I can give you a question that you can answer. You sent 4 more texts to Ms. Page, and her first response to you at the bottom of that page you're looking at is, quote, "We need to lock in," and then there's a black mark where someone's name's been redacted. "We need to lock in redacted in a formal, chargeable way, period. Soon, period." Whose name's been blacked out?
Sir, I don't know. I need to see the original list or original text.
You don't know. Okay. Well, I don't know either. Here's what else I don't know. I don't know if the person whose name has been redacted is Republican or Democrat. I don't know if they're black or brown or white.
I don't either, sir.
I don't know their religious beliefs. I don't know their sexual orientation. I don't know those things, and I don't care. But here's what I do know. I do know that decisions about when and whether to open investigations and when and whether to charge people with crimes aren't supposed to depend on who's sitting in the director's chair or on political decisions or on the political agendas of FBI agents and lawyers. So if a Trump-hating FBI agent and a Trump-hating FBI lawyer who have talked about effing Trump, stopping Trump, impeaching Trump, are within hours of President Trump firing their boss, if they start talking about opening an investigation now that Andy is acting and that some person needs to be locked in a formal, chargeable way soon, I know, as a former U.S. attorney, that if in fact that's what happened, I know that whoever is the subject of that case that was opened now that Andy is acting, and whoever you and Ms. Page talked about needing to be locked in soon in a formal, chargeable way, well, they would have had their civil liberties violated. They would have been deprived.
That's probably going to be Manafort. That could also be General Mike Flynn, who they're talking about locking in a criminally liable way soon before Trump becomes president, so that maybe we can get someone to flip on President Trump. That's what this is all about.
Of due process. So my first question to you, you wouldn't answer. My second question to you, you couldn't answer. Let's go for a third question. On page 400 of the Inspector General report, someone tells the Inspector General, quote, "There is a bright line, a bright and inviolable line between what you think personally and belief and the conduct of your official business." Who said that?
I believe I did, sir.
You did say that. And I heard you say similar things last week. I heard you say similar things today. You said it very clearly. You said it very unequivocally in your opening remarks that you never crossed that inviolable line in 26 years. Earlier today, in response to a question, you said, "I took my personal belief out of every official action." So you're asking us to believe that when you say things like F Trump and stop Trump and impeach Trump, that those are just personal beliefs. And that when you say those things, you never cross that line, that bright, inviolable line, and allow it to impact your official conduct. That's really what this comes down to, that you're asking us to believe, isn't it?
Sir, I'm asking you to believe, and I'm offering you evidence.
Yeah, well, you
whether
have.
It's
You've
the
been-
IG report,
you've
whether
made
it's
it crystal
anything that's
clear.
been found, that there's been no
Yeah.
active bias
Listen,
found
you have
anywhere.
You have under oath been as clear as a bell on that. You've said it over and over again, and because of that, I'm almost embarrassed to ask you this question. Of the approximately 50,000 text messages that I've seen with your personal beliefs like F Trump, stop Trump, impeach Trump, go ahead and confirm on the record that none of that occurred on an official FBI device or on official FBI time. Go ahead and do that.
Sir, no, they did. Many of them did.
Oh, they
And I
did.
would say
Okay,
of the
so
50,000, sir. the
so
majority,
really,
the
no, I'll
grand
give you a
majority of
chance
those
at the
were
end. So
work-related.
what you really meant to say was that when you said you never crossed that bright, inviolable line, what you meant to say was, except for 50,000 times, except for hundreds of times a day where I went back and forth, expressing my personal opinions about effing Trump and stopping Trump and impeaching Trump on official FBI phones on official FBI time. Other than that, you never crossed that line. I'm sure there are 13,000 FBI agents out there that are beaming with pride at how clearly you've drawn that line. Agent Strzok, are you starting to understand why some folks out there don't believe a word you say, and why it's especially troubling that you, of all people, are at the center of the 3 highest profile investigations in recent times that involve President Trump, and that you were in charge of an investigation investigating, gathering evidence against Donald Trump, a subject that you hated, that you wanted to F him, to stop him, to impeach him? And do you see why that might call into question everything you've touched on all of those investigations? Chairman, I'm done with this witness, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, if I can respond.
Briefly.
Sir, well, there are several questions, and I'll answer them all briefly.
There were several statements. I only heard one question.
Fair enough. First, I understand why people might think that, particularly based on the misrepresentations of extreme folks in the media, conspiracy theorists, folks in this body and elsewhere. And that's why I'm glad to be here today publicly, why I'm glad to hear that people are calling for the release of my private interview so that people can judge for themselves who I am, what I said, and the facts, and not something that's being spun or misrepresented in some 10 o'clock talk show or other place. So absolutely, I can understand that, and I'm glad that the facts are coming out. Second, sir, to your earlier point about, I never, and I am unaware of any case being opened that represented some violation of civil liberties or a removal of due process rights. I have never done any activity, opened any case with regard to that. And when you look in the context of what had occurred, sir, during the time that Director Comey had been fired, where the president said initially that that had occurred because of a memorandum written by the Deputy Attorney General looking at his conduct in the Clinton investigation, and then days afterwards pivoting and telling Russian diplomats and Lester Holt that it was because of the Russia investigation and a huge burden had been taken off his shoulders. We all were very concerned about, from an investigative standpoint, the pace and severity and the unprecedented nature of facts and events that were unfolding, and our investigative desire.
I did say briefly.
To go, I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I'm
Mr.
wrapping
Strzok,
up.
in that regard, though,
desire to lock things in before things changed was very important to us.
Pointed to your response, however, and in the interest of full transparency, and to Mr. Ratcliffe's point, will you authorize the release of all of the other text messages that have not been released to the Congress to this point?
Sir, I would authorize the release of any work-related text messages that are out there.
But the question is, what's work-related and what is not?
Peter Strzok was the one who determined what was work-related and what was not. That was not done by an investigation. That was not done by an independent investigator. That was literally done by Peter himself. He went through and said, yeah, these ones are the ones that you can look at. These are the ones that I'm going to keep for myself. So which ones are work-related is critical. And whether you get to call which ones work-related, I mean, we need all of your text messages, and not just your work phone, your private phone. And really everyone involved in this investigation's work and private phone and their computers, all of their emails need to be public documents, because this is a level of animus and bias that we have not seen. It's unprecedented, and the importance of this case cannot be understated. This is the president of the country that we're talking about. We're talking about impeachment. We're talking about overthrowing an elected government. So this is an unacceptable amount of animus from the FBI. This is overthrowing a government, and we need this to be completely transparent. The DOJ and the FBI are hiding as much as they can and releasing whatever helps them. This needs to be completely transparent, and every ounce of transparency assists people, the people. That's why when they're asking, can we release the testimony for Peter Strzok, the Republicans are like, well, fine, yeah, go ahead and release that, as long as we can also release the testimony from McCabe, because that's going to lead to a lot more scoring points for Republicans and actually criminal convictions than, Peter Strzok is really going to help Lisa Page out. They're just going to talk about it anyway. Lisa Page is going to be completely prepared for tomorrow's testimony, given what Peter Strzok had to deal with. So it's not important. What the outcome of the release of all of the documents will be much more important. That could be a death blow to the FBI and the Department of Justice. So we really need to get to the bottom of what is in those computers, those texts, those emails. I mean, we've got the director of the FBI, James Comey, using a Gmail account for FBI business. Any computer, any device that may have touched that Gmail account, that includes his wife's computer, his wife's phone. I mean, any device that could have gone to that Gmail account really needs to be subpoenaed and taken, not just asked for, taken. It's a subpoena. You raid their office and you take their device, because they're not going to hand it over. They're going to hand it over to you in 100 separate pieces without an SD card, just like they handed over Hillary Clinton's devices. We're about to close this off, but we're just going to keep this going for another minute or so while he exposes Peter Strzok as hiding his own personal text messages. Let's back it up 5 seconds.
But the question is, what's work-related and what is not?
That's right, sir. And I would not accept or agree to the release of non-work-related text messages.
Even though your testimony is that you would never let your work interfere with your personal opinion.
That is exactly my
So
testimony.
how are we going to know that unless we see those text messages?
Well, the Inspector General, very carefully, an independent body, went exhaustively through the entirety of that
Inspector
body
General-
and found, sir, that there were no acts of bias, that there was nothing demonstrable.
Inspector
in
General
any of that
works for an
material.
entirely different entity than the United States Congress. Will you authorize release of them to the United States Congress?
No, sir.
The
Mr. Chairman, point of
I just want to point out that the OIG, if the OIG says that that everything the FBI did seemed legitimate and that everything that Peter Strzok seemed legitimate, I just want to point out this tweet by Stefan Molyneux. Peter Strzok says everything he did was legit in the eyes of the FBI, and I want to point out the Office of the Inspector General. For 50% of Americans, this is oddly comforting. Very odd that this comforts you. But for the remaining 50% of sane individuals in America, it's legitimately terrifying, because the FBI is being run in the most biased possible manner, and everyone knows it. This is absolutely terrifying. We don't have any justice. This is the pinnacle of our justice system. Anything that we are trying to investigate in regards to this, we're having to refer straight to the Department of Justice, who we're investigating. And so the Department of Justice cannot be the people investigating themselves. This cannot be an internal investigation. The FBI can no longer internally investigate itself. You can put a training day in, but we don't trust any sort of internal investigation within the FBI or the Department of Justice, we need a second special counsel to start raiding all of your offices and all of your devices and all of your texts and all of your emails so we can get to the actual bottom of this criminal liability.
Inquiry. I'm trying to understand.
Sorry for that quick interruption. We are going to get to the bottom of these investigations. We are going to figure out, I mean, we already know that they were biased, but we're going to get to the bottom of Hillary Clinton's investigation. And I think that it's going to start to become important that the Republicans who are actually trying to get to the bottom of this shift their focus from the Trump investigation and focus it on Hillary Clinton's investigation, focus it on the exoneration of Hillary Clinton, because that is where a lot of the arrests and indictments will come from. They won't come from exonerating Trump. We know that Trump deserves to be exonerated. Any arrest of Trump will lead to overwhelming discontent from the American people. It's not something that they can do legitimately. They're going to have to piece by piece do it by getting Manafort to flip on somebody and then somebody to flip on Trump and eventually try and pull him down legally that way. But right now, I mean, even if you try to pull down Trump legally, the bias has been so clearly displayed that any arrest will be completely protested and will not stand. So let's go ahead and transition this back off, and we're going to finish up this interview in just a couple seconds.
His answer, my understanding was that the Inspector General did not see what he is claiming to be his personal text, that they were requested and he delivered what he said was business related. So if I understand correctly, no one has seen anything that he determined, Mr. Strzok determined, would not be delivered because in his opinion they were not business related. I have a number of texts in front of me that I would say were very personal that we're looking at that undoubtedly he would have objected to turning over.
The gentleman makes a very good point. He may want to ask questions about that when he is shortly to be recognized. But first, we're going to recognize the gentlewoman from Texas.
And that was Congressman Isa making a very good point, making the point that Peter Strzok got to basically redact his own text messages. It's absolutely ridiculous. When you're under investigation, you're not the one in charge of your own redaction. It's crazy. That's going to do it for us this afternoon. This is just the first half of this joint testimony, but with the Oversight Committee and the Judiciary Committee for the House. We're going to get more testimony from Peter Strzok this afternoon, and I will do more reporting on that tonight. This is huge news, guys. We are finally getting people who are criminally liable to testify under oath. This isn't the OIG and Director Wray. This is much bigger than that. Every question that Peter Strzok is asked, he could criminally open himself up to liability. He could be open to criminal liability with any misstep, any wrong answer. If he gives the wrong answer and exposes the FBI, Department of Justice, anyone within those, any of his higher-ups, James Comey or McCabe, this whole investigation could be cracked wide open and arrests may start to come. This is a really big interview, so we're going to stick with this. I'm going to bring you more on this tonight, and I just appreciate your time. I know this is a longer video, but I'm going to try and clip it down so that it's not quite so long. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Ross Madden with the Truth of Think Tank. Visit exposethedeepstate.com. That's my website if you want to learn more about the deep state, and you can also pick up a bumper sticker. I'm selling FBI I'm with her in honor of this special occasion, and FBI I'm with her bumper stickers, and also Trump 2020 bumper stickers, which I believe are very special. I know Trump is going to run in 2020. I know he's going to win in 2020, and I know you're going to want to support him in 2020. So just go ahead and get your bumper sticker now. And actually, you should get a bunch of them because Democrats will rip them off your car. Usually they won't violate your car, pop your tires, or anything. Usually they'll just rip off your signs, but you should get a couple just in case. Democrats are ruthless, and they don't fight fair. They don't like free speech, and they don't like people to have Trump 2020 on their cars. So we got to fight the Democrats and let them know that we're supporting our president, Donald Trump, for 4 more years. And then maybe 4 more years after that, we'll talk about the term limits in another video. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Ross Madden. Have a great day.